Part 1. Girls Who Wear Glasses. She shifted her weight on my lap and smiled at me as she brushed her long blonde hair back off her forehead. I held her tighter and kissed her. A warm breeze came in the window, causing the translucent beige curtains to wave back and forth for a moment. It was a very large bedroom, must have been a very old and expensive apartment, and I could see skyscrapers and townhouses outside the window out of the corner of my eye. I could never remember feeling so languid and at ease while making love before. It was very quiet. I couldn't hear anything from outside at all, which is pretty unnatural in the city. All I could hear was the noise of the sheets as Dorothy moved back and forth on top of me. I had let Dorothy pick me up on the highway. It was one of the huge old 1970s Chevys which passed before slowing down and eventually stopping in front of me. The daylight was large and bright and yellow, and she squinted out of the passenger side window as I walked over. "Walking barefoot on the freeway, boy?" she called out to me. I shrugged and bent over to peer into the rolled-down window. "I don't like shoes and don't care what anyone thinks of me," I explained. "And I'm 40. I'm not a boy." She chuckled silently, a grin as big as the Cheshire Cat on her face. "Get in, handsome," she said. I opened the car door and sat down on the seat. The old plastic cover had been well patched with duct tape over the years. She shifted the car into gear with that stick on her steering wheel, gave a signal, and pulled back onto the road. "Where are you going?" she asked. I was about to make a snippy comment about that-away, but thought better of it. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I don't think it matters. It's out of the city for a while." She nodded. Everyone in the city had that feeling of wanting to get out sooner or later. "Dorothy," she said, introducing herself with a quick glance in my direction. "Julian," I said. "Uh-huh," she said. "If you don't care what anyone thinks of you, why did you make a point of telling me you're 40? I leaned back and closed my eyes. The warmth of the seat at my back and the sun on my cheek was pleasant, and I felt drowsy. "That's a good point," I said, and fell asleep. Part 2. Doomed! The sprite moved in the dark, a red, fiery creature. I watched it from the window in the warehouse corridor at least 5 flights up. I saw it across a field, past a stream, against a dark background, but it was too dark to tell what it was exactly. The background. It was fighting 3 men, who had rifles. The fighting was far enough away that I could see the weapons discharge, but I couldn't hear them. The sprite broke the back of one of the men as 2 of the others converged on it. I turned away. I walked across the cold, sandy, and dusty floor, past the door to a large freight elevator and into a passageway. The passage ran downwards at a 15-degree angle for about a mile, and when I emerged from the end, I was in the city. Not just any city, but a particular city. "Welcome to Christina," a passerby said to me in English, heavily tinged with an accent I couldn't place. I turned to say thank you, but he had already passed into the crowd. I couldn't recall seeing a crowd this big since I was in San Francisco in 1989, or maybe Munich 3 years earlier. A youthful man with short hair and his pretty blonde girlfriend passed me. He held her around the waist, and they looked at me as I passed by. Part 3. Granny Bitch. Gray-haired Granny Iris sat and looked at me. "So," she said. "Is this trip really necessary?" I asked. "I don't want to be here," she said. "Well, neither do I." She glared at me. "I see you're still the same asshole you always were." I grinned at her without any humor. "And you are still the same selfish bitch." She lit a cigarette. I just sat and stared. She blew smoke in my face. It made me want to cough, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. So we just sat and stared. I scratched my nose and looked at the ceiling. "This is pointless," she said. "Wasn't it always?" I asked. She shrugged. "You have nothing else you want to say?" I asked, feeling bitter beside myself. She looked away. I snorted once, disappointed in myself, in that I actually expected more from her, got up, and walked out of the room. Part 4. Still doomed. Back in the hallway by the freight elevator, there were 2 doors leading beyond. One was like a big freezer door with silver handles and cylinders, and I tried to open it but couldn't. I obviously needed to get in there to get to the next level, but couldn't until I accomplished something here on this level. I wandered to the second door. It was silver like the first door, but flat on this side, like an elevator door seen from a corridor. It had a big, reinforced window in it into which I peered. The corridor beyond was well lit. I flinched as a sprite struck a blow against the window attempting to hit me. It couldn't get through. In fact, the window was soundproof, so I couldn't hear it snarling in frustration at me. I was strangely calm and unafraid, and flipped at the bird. It roared silently as it was shot repeatedly from behind. It whirled around and confronted the 3 Marines who were attacking it with high-powered rifles or double-barreled shotguns. The fight escalated as 2 more sprites joined it, and one of the Marines went down in a silent roar of flame and smoke. I backed off. I wouldn't be able to get through there for a while. Might as well go look around Christina while I was waiting. Part 5. Garbage. My mother handed me another box. Here, she said. Okay, I replied. And where am I putting this one? She pointed to the landfill in the middle of the estuary. There's a hole right in the middle. Okay, I replied. I walked out carefully on a narrow wooden walkway. Dirty, filthy stacks of newspapers and magazines were all around at ground level, surrounded by mounds of decaying garbage. The stacks seemed to extend downwards for 15 or 20 feet. Brackish water from the Hudson seeped around the corners of the landfill. After a while, I had to start gingerly walking on top of the garbage to get to the big partially filled hole in the middle. I dropped the box down the hole. It bounced once, and goop seeped up around it. Hey, I said, noticing something, and jumped in after it. On top of the box was an old issue of Rolling Stone from when Paul was arrested in Japan for possession. Mom, I called out. And underneath that, old issues of Circus magazine that I had bought in the 70s, including the one with the sexy photo of Stevie Nicks lying on top of a car. I thought I had misplaced that 20 years ago. Mom, I called again. My mother is a small woman, not taller than 5 feet. She staggered to the edge of the hole under the burden of 2 more large boxes of old magazines and stuff. She let the boxes drop to the top of the side of the hole, just above my shoulder. Hey, Mom, I said. She smiled at me. What is it, dear? There's a lot of stuff in here that I don't want to throw out, I replied. Hand it up here, she said, and I'll help you bring it back to your apartment. I handed her up the old rock magazines, and she made a neat pile next to the hole. Just stack everything up here, she said. Okay, I said. I started hunting through the box at my feet, and then the other boxes that were all around. They were all filled with junk, mostly, but every other book or magazine was one I wanted to keep. I had to keep these things. A signed first edition of Edward Gorey cartoons, a program signed by Peter Tork, some of those index cards with John's autograph and his little caricatures of himself, Yoko, and Sean that had once been so plentiful, a People magazine with an article on the young Drew Barrymore, and old printouts of stories and handwritten poems and song lyrics. The pile at my head got bigger and bigger as I tried to save more and more. My mother dropped some more boxes into the hole around me. I'm going to get something to eat, she said. See you back at your place. I picked up an antique leather-bound edition of Wuthering Heights that someone had once mistakenly sold to me for £1.60 instead of the real price of £160. Good Lord, you can't throw this away, I thought. Mom, I called. It started to get dark very quickly, and I started to feel uncomfortable. The river began to stink more strongly than before, and the piles and piles of paper beneath my feet felt more Amorsaki. I started to see roaches moving out of the corner of my eyes, and I knew the rats would be coming soon. It got darker and the water level started to rise. I suddenly felt very alone and vulnerable, surrounded by both worthless garbage and priceless treasures. Oh shit, I said as I climbed out of the hole and started to hurry towards the narrow wooden walkway. Part 6. One afternoon in Luxembourg. It was late in the day, the sun was setting slowly, and the typically European streets were being traversed by equally typical Europeans. A young man with short brown hair and his girlfriend passed me. He had his arm around her waist, and they looked at me as they passed. There weren't any cars around at all. That was odd. I entered a cafe, and with my broken German, ordered Weisswurst and a locally brewed beer. Paid the man and took the food to a table outside. Weisswurst is a white sausage made with veal, not too dissimilar from bratwurst, and virtually tasteless. I dabbed some typically spicy European mustard onto my plate, dunked a slice of wurst into it, placed the result in my mouth, and chewed slowly. I sat and tried to relax and watch people walk by, especially the young girls. It was the middle of a hot summer, and I appreciated the scarcity of material in the fashions. I upended the bottle of beer and swallowed a gulp that was so cold it hurt my parched throat, and belched quietly. I started on the second sausage and was grateful for the slice of bread the waiter had provided, as the mustard would be too much without it. Electric lights along the boulevard began to come on, and the uniquely European architecture of the buildings took on a gloomier feel as the dark shadows of night caressed their edges. I ordered another beer from the garçon, and he made me change from a large leather belt and satchel combination around his waist. "Danke sehr," I said. He just nodded. I nursed the beer for a while and started to feel very chilly. I untied my windbreaker from around my waist and slipped it on. Soon it was too cold to sit anymore, and I finished the bottle. I wasn't sure if one tipped here or not, so I left a couple of shillings on the table just in case before I left. I walked down the boulevard and over a small bridge spanning the river. The Danube, I thought, but the water level was so low that I couldn't see any water until I was directly above it. When I could see it, it looked dirty and well used. Once I reached the other side, I climbed down the bank and walked down the sidewalk that ran parallel to the river. It was very dark, but the old-fashioned street lamps lit the trees well enough that I could see the green of the leaves. It was a long walk past carefully manicured lawns and gardens. After a while, a skirmish broke out on the left bank between a sprite and 3 armed men. They dispatched the monster quickly and then high-fived each other. I smiled. Part 7. Nazis in Space! The alarm siren was going off as I carried Jacob down the corridor. A cloud of smoke broke in front of me. Someone called my name. "Julian!" It was my wife. She pushed past some of the other crew members, dodged a broken piece of bulkhead, and caught up to me. "Mama!" Jacob, our 2-year-old son, said, holding his arms out. Sahe took him from my arms and gave him a hug. The deck slanted and jumped under our feet as a loud clang rang through the skin of the ship. "You and your stupid ideas," Sahe snapped. All right, I replied, biting back my anger. "It's not my fault." I took her hand and pulled her down the corridor. "Yes, it is," she snarled at me. "Shut up," I yelled back over my shoulder. "I have an idea." It was a pretty bizarre idea, but I didn't see that we had any choice. We could stay in the ship, which was on a crash course to Alpha Centauri, as well as being under attack by a Centauran warcruiser, or we could take our chances jumping into one of the quantum drive access points. We reached the bulkhead that led to one of the access tunnels off the engine room. Sahe skidded to a stop. "Oh, no," she said. "We don't have any choice," I snapped back, throwing my weight against the round, wheel-like hatch switch. It creaked before giving underneath my 200-plus pounds of weight, and I landed painfully on my knees. "Warning," an automated system announced. "Radiation levels will become unstable if access bulkhead is not resealed." "You're out of your mind," Sahe yelled over the loud hissing of gas from a broken conduit above our heads. The ship was hit by multiple photonic explosions and listed 30 30 degrees to starboard. My lunch tried to crawl back up my throat, but I swallowed it down. If we try a lifeboat, the Centauris will just pick us off like sitting ducks, I replied loudly over the ambient noise. Mama! Jacob yelled, scared. She hugged him closer. I pointed to a viewport on the starboard bow. Even out of the corner of my eye, I could see the star approaching much too quickly. Do you want to die? I yelled. I want my old life back, she replied ruefully. Too late, I replied and pulled her inside the access tunnel. God damn you, she said between gritted teeth. Jacob blubbered on her shoulder. 10 paces inside the access tunnel was a quantum terminal. I drew my blaster, aimed, looked away, and blew off the containment seal. Harsh purple light from the radiating source filled the tunnel brilliantly. Oh, God, Sahe said. Julian, I'm scared. I shrugged. Let's go, I said. I put my arms around them and hugged them tightly before throwing all three of us into the radiating source. A hard flash of purple light lit up all around us, and then we were Part 8. Yeah, but it's not really you. A soldier who looked just like Michael Palin climbed out of a foxhole on the screen of the movie theater. A soundless explosion went off next to him. The silent newsreel paused as a huge slide of text was displayed on the screen. It was in Czech or some damn thing, and I couldn't read it. Other soldiers were shown running for cover as explosions went off all around them. I looked at my watch. 6 minutes after noon. I yawned. Okay, enough of this. I got up and went into the lobby. A tall woman standing across from me tossed her head to move some of her blood-red hair out of her eyes, and in the process caught sight of me. She smiled. "Highwell!" she called. I looked around to see who she was talking to. She ran over to me, threw her arms around me, and hugged me. "Highwell, it's been months since I've seen you." She felt nice and smelled even nicer. "I'm sorry, miss," I replied with true regret. "My name isn't Highwell." She held me at arm's length and studied my face for a moment. "Oh," she said. "Are you sure you don't know me? My name's Kathy." She was very pretty, even with her overbite and the gap between her front teeth. I shook my head. "Kathy Coupe?" she asked. I shrugged. She backed away slowly, blushing fiercely, and then turned and hurried into the dark theater. I turned and walked outside. It was raining. It kind of felt good. I didn't mind and started walking up the avenue towards the East 80s. I was soaked through and through in minutes, but I figured it wouldn't hurt my old ripped at-the-knee jeans or Roger Waters t-shirt. I walked up Fifth Avenue next to Central Park. Cars and taxis passed me periodically, but it was a quiet evening. The rain was heavy and dark, and the only light was a smear of yellow from the street lamps on my right and the park lanterns on the left. I always liked those lanterns. They looked so 1880s somehow. I wondered how many were originals and how many had been replaced over the years. Part 9. Continental Elevator. I entered the corridor again. The first silver door, the one with the window, was open now. I stepped carefully over the corpses. I paused a moment and relieved one of the dead bodies of its weapon, a double-barreled shotgun. It felt good in my hands. I also took 3 belts of shotgun shells off the poor doomed Marines. I shot a test round into the wooden wall and reloaded, over and over until I caught the rhythm. I nodded in satisfaction and walked down the corridor. It felt like I was on the floor of a multi-level warehouse larger than most neighborhoods. A draft blew through regularly and smelled vaguely of the sea. I came up upon a large elevator. A crowd of people streaming in from the other direction were all pushing and shoving to get into the car. I flipped the safety of my weapon on and merged with the stream. A moment later I looked up and smiled at a man who reminded me of a young Jonathan Fred. He nodded. I started in a tone that exuded confidentiality. "I don't know where we're going." "Does anyone?" he said and chuckled. "No, seriously, where are we going?" He looked at me as if he thought I was daft. "This is the express to Paris," he said. "From Christina?" I asked. "Yeah," the Fred lookalike said, as if it were self-evident. "We're traveling something like 1,000 miles by riding an elevator." The car lurched into motion, interrupting me as the old wood groaned. "Riding an elevator down?" The Frid guy started to get annoyed. Yes, he snapped, and stopped himself before adding, moron, out loud. How strange, I muttered to myself, finding the idea ridiculous. The elevator stopped at the second floor of an Uno department store, and we all got out. I wondered what the exchange rate was as I looked at a sign saying that a pair of socks cost 60 francs. Outside, much to my surprise, we really were in Paris. I could see the Eiffel Tower above the building tops, and everything bustled loudly as it always did on a sunny day in the City of Lights. This wasn't right, I thought to myself. You don't cross the European continent by riding an elevator down a level. I wondered if this was some kind of mass illusion, say, a generation spaceship flying through space with real old-time Earth environments simulated to keep the cattle in line. I shook my head. The city certainly seemed real enough. A blonde young woman and her boyfriend passed me. She was holding his hand, and they looked at me with great curiosity and a slight bewilderment as they passed. Part 10. New Berlin. We passed through nowhere and stepped out onto a street. We were in the city of London. It was visibly the city of London. But something felt different. That seems to have worked, my wife said. Jacob sniffled and looked around. In a manner of speaking, I replied, this is London. Sahe frowned. You think? New York and London are the two cities I know best in the world, I replied. This is London. Sahe pointed to a street sign posted high on the side of a building. But the street sign is in German, she said. Oh. Shit. Part 11. Watching the elephant. I was walking through a green field. Could have been anywhere, from Hampstead Heath to somewhere in New Jersey. I couldn't see any trees or hear any birds that could have given me a clue either way. Not that I cared. I was too busy watching the elephant. There was a pit in the middle of the field, a rope stretched from one end to the other, the sort of rope you might expect to see on a seafaring vessel. The rope was pounded into the ground at both ends with huge wooden spikes. Something was trying to cross the rope. The elephant. It balanced on one of its hind legs. The forelegs were waving in the air, doing their bit to keep Mr. Elephant balanced. In his trunk he held a small pink parasol, which waved back and forth in the air. He caught me looking at him, and I saw a twinkle in his eye. He winked merrily at me and took another step forward. And the rope broke. Ow! That's got to hurt. Part 12. We have a ways. I glanced around. The ground is less cluttered and looks cleaner than the last time we were here, I said. A small truck drove by. What time of day do you think it is? Sahe asked. I sniffed the air. Morning, I guess. That explains why hardly anyone is out and about yet, she said. I nodded. Mama, Jacob said. Sahe hugged him and put him down. He's hungry, she said. What are we going to do about it? I asked and ruffled his hair. She shook her head. I picked a direction at random. This way, I said. Where are we going? She asked. I don't know. She poked my arm. I thought you said you knew this city. I do, just not this part of it. It's a pretty big city as far as cities go. She growled under her breath. A small car pulled up and a man in a uniform stepped out. Hey! He said loudly and stood commandingly in our way. What's doing see here? Do you mind? I replied. We're walking here. Deutsch sprechen, he commanded. Sorry, Strumpelpater, I said. I don't speak Nazi. Mr. Uniform kneed me in the groin, and I sank to the ground. Sahe cried out. Nein, nein, she said. Bitte sehr, mein Herr. Das ist meiner Mann. Kann nicht gut Deutsch sprechen. Fuck. I was groaning under my breath. It hurt. I tried to row in any direction that was away from the bastard. Jacob was crying and holding me. It's okay. It's okay, sonny boy, I told him, in between breaths. I got up to my knees and hugged him. Du bist Deutscher? The man asked. Sahe nodded and lowered her eyes in a sign of respect. What are you doing in New Berlin? The man asked my wife in German. I'm so sorry, sir, she said. We have just arrived and were wondering how we would feed our son. Papers, the man said. Sahe turned a lighter shade of brown than normal. They were stolen, she said. You want money? He asked. Stolen, she said. I got to my feet and wished I had known she could lie like this before we had gotten married. It would have helped me avoid that particular mistake. The man shook his head and smiled. It was a nasty smile. A very nasty smile. This wasn't good. No money, he said in English, looking at me. And no papers. No, sir, I replied carefully. Your wife? He asked me, leaning in my face. She is very beautiful and claims to be German. His breath smelled like he really needed to floss 2 years ago and hadn't. But her skin color, he continued. Why, she is a nigger. She couldn't possibly be a German. I trembled with vicious, sudden rage, but clenched my fists and kept it in. But yeah, he continued, turned attention back to her. Yeah, she is very beautiful. He puffed a black leather glove, brutally squeezed her left breast. Perhaps I won't shoot you if she gives me a good enough blowjob. Without even thinking about it, I crouched into a horse stance and side-kicked him harder than I'd ever kicked anyone in my life. No, Sahe shouted. I could feel his ribs cracking under my booted heel. Mr. Uniform flew away from us and struck a parked car, which I suddenly noticed was a Volkswagen. Thanks, Adolf. He howled like a wounded animal, which my brain thought to itself in a sort of detached kind of way. He was. I launched myself in his direction, preparing to do a flying kick to his head, but he pulled a pistol and shot me. Part 13. You're dead. There was white fluffy stuff all around. What the? I said. And there was no ground. Oh, shit. Hi, Julian, a familiar-sounding woman's voice said from behind me. Iris, I said, without even turning around. Uh-huh, she said. I turned and looked at her. She looked exactly as she had at 18, the last time I saw her. Young, thin, and pretty. You haven't changed much, I said. She shrugged. You have, she replied. I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of an old man, wrinkled with brown liver spots, and they shook slightly. I don't understand, I said. You're dead, she said. How come you look so young and I'm still an old man? I asked. You're dead, she said. Where is this place? I asked. I looked around slowly. All I could see was white and gray everywhere in all directions. Where's my family? I asked. You're dead, she said with a sigh. Where's my wife? I asked. What part of you're dead don't you understand? She asked. I felt confused. The part that starts with you and ends with Ed, I guess, I replied. Iris rolled her eyes. She grabbed a puff of cloud, pulled it over near her cute as a button rear, and sat down. You're a stiff, she said, crossing her arms. Bereft of life, you rest in peace. If they hadn't cremated your ass, you'd be pushing up the daisies. I looked at her. Well, my back didn't hurt. I couldn't recall a time that it hadn't hurt in the last, 20 or 30 years or so. I'm dead, I said. She bit her lip and nodded her head. Uh-huh. Shit. Uh-huh. I tested a nearby puff of fluff and found it solid, so sat on it. It reminded me of sitting on a waterbed. I see, I said. Uh-huh, she said. I crossed my arms. Well, why are you, of all bitches, doing here? Shouldn't your ass be burning in that other place way below? You mean New Jersey? She asked. She shrugged and smiled. I was the person you most wanted to see. Fucking hell you are, I said. Tell the big dude that, she replied. You can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to eternity. But I hate you, I replied conversationally. I'm not real fond of you either, she replied. Fuck, I said. Can I go now? She asked. Yeah, I said. And she was gone, just like that. Iris, I wanted to see that witch? There ain't no justice, I said out loud. suspended over the ground, more than 30 feet high. He looks to me doing what he does. A tightrope bouncing with his nose, watching the elephant, watching the elephant. There goes the pachyderm. He's gray and big and fat. If he missed like a pancake, you'll be flat. He looks to me doing what he does. Inside, tightrope act, bouncing on his toes, watching the elephant, watching the elephant. Yes. Watching the elephant, watching the elephant, yes, watching the hell, watching the hell, watching the elephant, yeah. Watching the elephant.